Breaking news coming in on the broadcast. This is an extremely important update coming in regarding the India-US trade deal, where talks have picked up pace ahead of formal signing in of the trade pact, and just days after the US Supreme Court struck down the reciprocal tariffs that were imposed by Donald Trump. In fact, let's get in my colleague Shiv Arora, NDTV's managing editor, for more updates and perspective on this. Shiv, just days after the US Supreme Court said that the reciprocal tariffs were completely illegal, you have now the trade talks between US and India gathering pace, indicating fresh momentum.
You know, India has not responded to what the Supreme Court has said. That has led to its own eruption in the United States between Trump and the Supreme Court there. But India has played this very carefully. And what you're seeing in this image of the US Commerce Secretary Lutnick, Piyush Goyal, and the US Ambassador to India in what appears to be a very friendly and warm embrace. Secretary Lutnick has some kind of memento in his hand, shows that India and the United States are progressing past this hiccup that the Trump administration would have at least internally seen as a setback. Remember, President Trump, as temperamental as he is, has practically swatted aside what the Supreme Court had ordered, basically designating all those tariffs as illegal, and has instead imposed additional tariffs on many countries, and India is one of those countries. So what this image projects is that India and the United States are moving forward on that interim trade deal framework that had been agreed upon just a few weeks before the US Supreme Court's word as far as delegitimizing those tariffs are concerned. And it basically shows that the diplomacy has kicked in after many, many weeks, if not months, of friction between the two countries. The Supreme Court verdict doesn't, at least for the interim period, directly impact where India and the United States stand as far as that framework is concerned. So this is good news for India and the US.
After the verdict, Donald Trump did say that he's going to impose 10% across the board for all countries, including India, progressively take it up to about 15%. The sense one gets is that those conversations are likely to play out in this important meeting that's taking place, because that's how you will logically reach the trade pact that has to be signed by both countries.
You're absolutely right, Gauri, and there are many aspects that are still unclear. I would only describe what we're seeing in this image, and what you just raised, as being part of a story in motion. When India is dealing with the Trump administration on the tricky issue of tariffs, India has the maturity to recognize that virtually everything that comes out of the White House when it comes to tariffs, is something that is changeable, something that is revisable, something that can be changed overnight depending on the whims of the man sitting in the White House, something that can from the edges at least be business as usual, as this picture radiates clearly. There are many nitty-gritties, smaller details, including what you rightly pointed out, the 10% tariff that applies to all countries, that even India hasn't commented upon officially, and that is very telling, because I think this projects the fact that the External Affairs Ministry, the Indian government, right up to the Prime Minister's office, are very well aware that commenting on every single development coming out of the United States right now is very likely to be completely counterproductive. India sees the long term as far as this president is concerned. The midterms are coming. That brings a whole new political dynamic. And for India, this is national interest. Play it cool, play it smooth with Trump, don't ruffle any feathers, get the best deal, push back when you really can, which India has done as far as various sectors are concerned. Smile and wave like in these pictures to at least give the impression that things are going smoothly and diplomacy is back on the front burner rather than the friction of the last 1 year. And ultimately, in the days ahead, hopefully things will actually settle into a kind of rhythm and a pattern that has been reflective of the larger relationship. The idea is not to get bogged down with the tactical hostilities and look for the bigger deal that is definitely ahead.
I think India has been extremely mature there because, Shiv, you and I both know that Howard Lutnick was actually the one who was pretty much the face of that abrasive period that India and US saw in terms of, prior to that trade understanding that both countries reached. In terms of what Piyush Goyal put out on the social media platform, where he said that he hosted the US Commerce Secretary and the Indian ambassador, US Ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, he said engaged in a very fruitful discussion to expand our trade and economic partnership. So essentially, this is about trade pact, but something much beyond than that as well.
100%. And, the point you raised about how Secretary Howard Lutnick, was one of the persons who was considered to be most abrasive, an attack dog, if I may use that phrase, along with people like Peter Navarro, who were, tasked by Donald Trump to keep the heat on India, raise the temperatures, remain on the front foot, keep India on the defensive. And then you've got this picture of him smiling, holding a memento with Piyush Goyal. The two sides, the two elements cannot be more different. But I think that's precisely where the maturity of India actually comes. India could have chosen to push back at every step, an emotive response. We do know that our opposition here in India has been goading the government into some kind of a knee-jerk reaction or an emotive reaction to Trump and his secretaries. But India hasn't done that, and I think the fruits of that are visible now in this picture. The disclaimer, however, is, Gauri, as you and I have been reporting, that the details need to be worked out. India is clear that it doesn't want to jump into every single detail right now, while the heat is high, while Trump is still sort of simmering over what has happened in the Supreme Court. India is looking for, a solution that comes in maybe a few weeks, a few months later.
All right.